How are you, Michael?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So I was fascinated by the contents of this book, but also just what goes into covering stories like these. The Comey firing, the Mueller investigation, you met sources at airports late at nights, you had to chase them down in D.C. It must have been quite an undertaking.
I mean, covering the Trump story was like nothing we had ever covered before, primarily because of the speed. It was just so fast and the news cycles turned over so quickly. And we went to great lengths, as you were saying, I lay out in the book about getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and driving to airports to pick people up that were flying in who I wanted to talk to, thinking that was the only time I would get a chance to actually speak with them. And to stay competitive and in this story, we pushed ourselves in ways that I think we never thought we'd be tested in.
You have a brilliant piece of wording in describing what it's like to interview Donald Trump, which is you say it's like unzipping fog, which will stay with me a long time. You did manage to sit down and interview him at Mar-a-Lago, but it wasn't really scheduled. How did it come about?
So what I was able to do was I was able to have one of the president's friends take me to lunch at his club. And the friend basically said, when the president comes off the course, we'll go over and talk to him and maybe you can interview him. So we did this. I was there. I looked like I was wearing golf clothes. And we went over and the president greeted me and I crouched down next to him like a catcher because I wanted his undivided attention. I knew if I was just standing there at the table with other people, then I wouldn't get a chance to talk to him. And I needed to sort of convince him that he would sit with me for an interview. So I crouched like a catcher and I sat there as long as I could. And he was going on and on about state and local taxes and stuff. And I said, Mr. President, my legs were killing me. And I said, Mr. President, this is all really interesting. Why don't we sit down and do an interview? And he said, okay, let me just finish lunch, which I described as him eating a head of lettuce that looked like it had been doused in Thousand Island dressing. So I go back to my seat, and within a matter of moments, I hear, Michael, get over here. And I had a chance to sit and interview the president for a half an
hour. It's really amazing the energy he has for talking when he's had his lettuce. You draw attention to, I think people who follow the story have heard the name Don McGahn, but maybe don't know him as well as they say know a Comey or a Mueller. You describe him as one of the most fascinating people of this story. Can you talk about how you came to that conclusion insofar as the role Don McGahn has played in the Trump administration?
So McGahn to me is consequential for so many reasons. First of all, he was in charge of the umbilical cord, the tie between Trump and his base, which is the judges, the thing that allowed conservatives to stay with the president when he behaved in ways that they found to be unsavory. Because of that, and because of the impact McGahn had, we will be living in Don McGahn's America for decades and decades to come because of how he remade the federal judiciary. He was also a chief container of Trump, someone who was stopping the president from hurting himself and the country in the office of the presidency. And on top of that, he was a witness against the president in an existential threat to the presidency, being the Mueller investigation. So McGahn, as a lawyer, was being used as a witness against his client. Now, the question you probably may have is why would McGahn stay if this was all going on? He stayed because he had a never and again opportunity to remake the courts and was willing to endure all of this and the risks of it in order to get the courts remade.
There is this idea that you talk about, and obviously others have talked about, especially when we talk about why did people stay, which is the idea of adults in the room. Do you feel like this theory in the end turned out to be a bad one, that they were not particularly good adults in the room, or was it just a reminder that some adults cannot control their children?
I think that there were more adults earlier in the administration, and they had more success. That does not mean that they had complete success or should be absolved for anything that happened in the first few years of the administration. But the John Kellys of the world, the Don McGahns, were more of a barrier around the president. The president effectively got rid of people like that and has people less barriers in his way now. And I think that has left the president even more emboldened than ever before. And he has a very unusual use of power and interest in using power. And there are those fewer guardrails now around him.
Well, Michael, I'm so impressed that you wrote this book while you continue to be a working reporter. I do not know how you juggle them both, but I am happy on each count. And thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.